you said on the call today, without AI, the market would be very sad, if you ask me. That definitely spread some sadness in the market, in the stock price. Could you give us a sense, when you talked about the new expectations, you focused on a couple of things, some of your customers like Samsung and Intel, but also China. And so I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of, on balance, how much of your resetting of expectations was related to changes in China versus weakness in some of the large customers that I mentioned?
Yeah, so I think last week we said a few things. And I think the first thing we said was that we still see AI as a huge opportunity for the industry. And we still see even upside on the short term. So I think AI has been with us now for a couple of years. And it's created a lot of excitement. And like all our peers in the industry, I do believe that AI will bring tremendous opportunity for this industry. So that's the first thing we have said. So I said on the long term, AI is going to build up a real strong opportunity for the industry. Now on the short term, I think you're aware of that, not everyone is surfing yet on the AI wave. I think some companies have been doing extremely well. Of course, NVIDIA comes to mind, TSMC, because they are providing the first one, the product, the second one, the process that is going to manufacture the product. So they're very strong. I think you see, and I'm sure you will see that in the weeks to come, a very, very strong demand. Now, what we also said is that not every semiconductor manufacturer is involved in AI. Some of them are doing chips for more traditional application, mobile, PC, automotive, and that part of the market is not recovering as quickly as we hoped. Right. And it does recover, so we see progress, and people are reporting that. But it's slower maybe than a lot of us expected. And I would say that concerns quite a few companies. All the companies, in fact, that today are not directly benefiting from the AI boost. That's a bit the split of the market we see today, at least.
Does that mean that we shouldn't expect a full recovery until 2026?
Well, that's always very difficult to say because, this is something we watch every quarter. Last week people were maybe a bit disappointed that we didn't give more heads up, but that's something we just keep watching. And, in the last 3 months, for example, we have seen that people were starting to push the brake. When do they start to push the accelerator again? We don't know because when you become cautious, it usually takes a bit of time before you look at the longer term again. But long term, we see growth. We see tremendous opportunity, which means that at some point of time, this has to come. 2025, by the way, we still see as a growth year for the industry, for ASML. The growth is not as high as I think a lot of people expected by then, but still a growth year. We also expect 26 to be a growth year, but it's too early to quantify that in very high accuracy or very high precision.
Got it. I want to talk a little bit about China. At one stage, they accounted for almost half of total revenue. What you shared with the market was that we have to think about China in its more historical perspective, where it accounted for something more like 20% of total revenue for you as a company. I'd like to get a sense from you of how much of that changing viewpoint on China is coming from weakness internally versus limits on what Chinese manufacturers can buy given export controls.
Yeah, so maybe first a step back. If you look at China, we just talked about AI. AI is the very advanced semiconductor manufacturing, very advanced chips. China, for a few years now, is focusing on what we call mainstream semiconductor. So semiconductor, we used to talk about IoT, all those chips that you have in all the product, making those products smarter. That's the type of chips China is basically manufacturing today. One part of the reason for that is, of course, the restriction that have been applied on EUV, as you know, which have prevented China to move to very advanced node. So the focus of China is on mainstream semiconductor. Right. The demand for that has boomed in 2021-22. As a result, the demand we had in China in 2021-22 has boomed as well. And 21-22 was the time, if you recall, where the demand was extremely high and ASML was struggling to deliver tools to everyone. Therefore, we couldn't deliver a large part of the demand in China. Backlog in China grew. 2023, the rest of the market softened. We got tools we could ship to China. Same in 2024. So the level of business we had with China in 23-24 was more of a result of the non-deliver capacity in 22-21 than anything else. And we have always explained that, you know, our quarter at 50% of the business in China, almost 50%, this was not normal. This was a peak resulting from basically a lack of delivery before.
Right.
The normal business in China is around 20-25%. Right. And that's the normal demand related to mainstream semiconductor. And I think we're going to go back to those numbers over time.
But there is something artificial about the way we think about China as a purchaser of equipment like ASML's, in the sense that many countries around the world, the U.S. principally, have been exerting export controls on the country. Are those controls going to become even more stringent? For example, China is not able to buy your most advanced machines. Is it possible that those restrictions could extend to the DUV level, which is used for more mainstream products?
Yeah, so if you go back to the root cause, or I would say the prime motivation of export control, it was to prevent China to have access to advanced technology. EUV is not in China. By not having EUV in China, we pretty much stop the ability of China to go beyond the 5, maybe 3 nanometer node. They may be able to do a few chips, and you may see some of that in the press, because of course everyone is watching very carefully. But fundamentally, by not having EUV, we have placed China, the regulation has placed China, I would say 10 to 15 years behind when it comes to advanced technology. We always talk about China. We usually forget to mention the fact that while those restrictions have applied on China on EUV, a lot of work has been done with other players in industry, Intel, TSMC, Samsung, on the most advanced EUV technology, as we know it today, High NA, etc., etc. So there's been a lot of work done every single day to continue to widen, if you want, this technology gap. And EUV is a key element to be able to do advanced technology. Right. Yeah, I think Intel has proven to the world a few years ago that without EUV, life was getting impossible. That's also true for China. So this limits part of the activity there.
Based on your interaction with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, with the Foreign Ministry, is it your expectation that the restrictions will become even more limiting on China's ability to purchase machinery like ASML's?
Well, if you look at the geopolitical landscape, I think it's clear that the United States will continue to apply pressure on their ally for more restriction. Now the discussion we have with the Dutch Prime Minister, with, I would say, the European political leader, because at the end of the day we are a European technology champion company, right? So yes, these are the people we have this discussion with. And the question is, what is right for the Netherlands? What is right for Europe? And as a result, what is right for ASML? So what restriction makes sense when it comes to national security, which has been the prime argument, and where does it stop, right? Because, like I say, a lot of the focus in China today is on mainstream semiconductor. And this is very different from, AI. So that's the discussion we have. I think the pressure will continue to be there because, if you look at the landscape, that's what it is. But I think that the discussion will get more sophisticated over time. The stake will become higher. And I think that countries like the Netherlands, all of Europe, where again we belong to, will also more and more start to discuss what makes sense for us.
Does it make sense for the European Union to work in such close concert with the U.S. in making it difficult for China to get access to these machines? At what stage, and do you find yourself wishing that the Dutch government and maybe the EU government would push back harder on some of the restrictions that the U.S. would like you to impose?
Well, I think, as a European citizen, right, Dutch, I would say resident, not citizen, as you know, I like to know that they do what is right for Europe and for the Netherlands. I think that's the most important things. We have always said in ASML, we don't make the law. Yeah, I'm not a politician. I don't know half of what they know, of course. And there may be good reason to restrict. And if there is a good reason to do so, and our government believes that, then we will go with it, of course. I think what's very important is to have the discussion with them so that they understand what we do, maybe understand the industry a bit better, and they are better equipped to really decide what is good, again, overall, for European countries and for the Netherlands. Based
on your interaction with your customers in China and globally, is it your perception that the motivations for export controls are truly about national security interests and regional security interests versus economic competition? In other words, how much do you think this is about keeping China from becoming economically more competitive with the rest of the world versus these are legitimate security threats?
Yeah, so Tom, I could almost turn you back the question, right? You almost have a rhetoric question, I think, in here. And what you see happening is more and more people are asking themselves this exact question. And if you look at the press, I think there is a real debate happening. That's one of the debate. Is it really about national security? We know that there is, of course, a strong economic competition between, the US, Europe, China. We see it everywhere. People question how much of that has a play in the decision. The other debate you start to see, which I think is also related, is does it help us or does it hurt us? I think there's a lot of companies in the US that start to also question, is that a good thing for us? And I think that's the key debate to have, because, like I said, I think at the end of the day, we need our governments to do the right thing for their people. And I think those debates are far more, active, far more lively than they were 2 years ago. And I think it's very good. I think it's very good because most probably this brings us to what I will call a more rational discussion and a more balanced set of decisions moving forward. So I think we can only welcome debate in such complicated issues.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit more. Let's bring things a little bit more local to the Netherlands, where ASML has discussed with the Dutch cabinet it wants to operate successfully in the country. Your predecessor, Wennick, said, if the Netherlands shuts down and we cannot get immigrants or foreign students, then fine, you should accept the consequences. Now, the Dutch government, to its credit, has set up a task force, said it will spend billions of euros in the Eindhoven region to keep ASML at home. My question is that enough, particularly in a world where there is a coalition led by a far-right lawmaker that's looking to implement the strictest ever anti-immigration policies? The cabinet's working on areas to restrict labor migration. You are dependent on labor from not just domestic, but around the world. How concerned are you about the forces at work bringing this anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy to the Dutch government?
Yeah, so here also maybe if you take a bit of a step back, I think that this is almost an issue for Europe, what you describe. As it's happening in the Netherlands, it's happening in many countries as we speak.
It's happening in the US.
It's happening in the US. And what we try to do, again, in our discussion with our government, every government wants to have companies like ASML in Europe, in the Netherlands, right? Everyone wants that. The more, the better. But to be able to have a company like this, you need a few things. You need to have access to capital, access to people, access to energy. You need to have a place to build your factory. All those conditions have to be there. And if you want to compete with other countries, China, the US, whatever, not only you need to have those conditions, but those conditions have to be as good as possible so that you can be competitive. Because this industry is extremely competitive. And no one should ever take any success for granted, right? Of course, the story of ASML is great, but it's only great after 40 years of very hard work, and this is, something you have to preserve. So we need all those conditions to be there. I think, the Draghi report was also a good way to summarize what the entire industry in Europe think. And our government has to work on that. And, of course, there's a bit of, immigration is a bit of a topic of the day because that's a way to get people attention. And I think what we have said is we have built our company with more than 100 nationalities. So bringing talents from everywhere has been an absolute condition for success, and this has to continue. Now, the good news is, as you said, I think people are listening. Okay. And maybe when you get down to business, people are more reasonable than maybe when they run a campaign or try to get elected.
Does it make sense for ASML to consider locating or relocating some operations outside of the Netherlands as at least a contingency measure to ensure that you have access to those ingredients that you mentioned that over 40 years have made ASML a great company?
So the threshold to do that is pretty high for us because we are developing extremely sophisticated machines. Technology, in fact, is a combination of many, many technologies that we have to bring together. Our supply chain is 80% of it around the Netherlands, Germany, Netherlands, France, Italy, very close. Our R&D is now, of course, almost fully in the Netherlands. We have R&D center also in the US, but I would say the large part of it is in the Netherlands. And one very important thing is because of the complexity of our tools, we want to keep our research development very close to our manufacturing center. Because what you may not realize is every 2 years we make a new step on our machines, so we have to improve them every couple of years like our customer. And it means that every 2 years we build new machines. And we have to teach our manufacturing people very quickly to be able to build those new machines. So there's been a long-lasting principle in ASML that we want to keep R&D and manufacturing together. And we'd like to do that in the Netherlands because this is where we are. So the threshold to change that, I think, is very high. And I would say new things like geopolitics give us even more reason to stay in the Netherlands so that we can build this very strong relationship with the Dutch government, with the European countries around us to also get the support of those governments in our activity.
So it's not really being considered now to maybe locate some operations elsewhere?
We have operation elsewhere.
Further.
But we will only grow those operations based on the activity we have in the different countries. But we don't at all consider to move a large part of our operation outside of the Netherlands. Not at all.
European Union has a tens of billions of dollars plan to expand local manufacturing capacity with the goal of doubling output from the region to 20% of the global market by 2030. In your estimation, is this a realistic expectation, and what are some of the hurdles that the region needs to overcome? This is the idea of increasing the region's capacity to be a bigger producer of chips to the global market.
Yeah, so I think it's very simple. If you want to achieve this kind of target, you have to build capacity. If we look at, for example, where we ship our system today, most of our system, 80% of our system, are still being shipped to Asia. So Asia remains, at least for quite a few years, I would say the key manufacturing place for semiconductor. to get to 30% share of the output, you have to take more than 30% of the tools that are going to be shipped. We don't see that yet, so I think that most probably the progress is not as fast as some people hope. I think you have also heard, of course, some major delay, right, in some of the factory in the US. So this is pointing to most probably a slower execution. But, you know, you only can start to believe the target will be achieved when the capacity built is exceeding 30% of the total worldwide capacity, which is not the case yet.
In our introduction, Caroline reminded us that we have an election in the U.S. in a couple of weeks. You might have heard about it. It's very close so far in the polls, but would you expect conditions for the global chip-making world to become better under one candidate versus the other in the U.S.?
Well, you know, there's a lot of, of course, like everyone else, you know, I follow the election in the U.S., and you can see a lot of polarization, I think, in the debates. There's one topic that still is, I would say, shared by both sides in the U.S., it's China. That's one, I think, one element of agreement. So we don't expect major changes there. We expect the pressure on export control on China to remain. To tell you exactly how this will play out, I really don't know, to be honest. I think
Do you think it'll be ratcheted up? Do you think that pressure will be, you talked about it's going to remain. Do you expect it to be ratcheted up?
I think, you know, I told you the pressure will be there. After, I don't know, it's speculation if, you know, one candidate may want to do more than the other. I don't know. But like I said, that most probably will not come without a debate. And I think that, you know, this is what we've seen happening now for a few months. But we'll see.
At Bloomberg Tech, we like to talk about new products. You've got a new one coming out, High NA EUV. We showed an image of it earlier, $380 million. One of our sizes and scopes, it's the size of a bus or a size of a small Amsterdam flat. Some of ASML's customers have raised concerns about the price tag. One SVP at a major customer said, "I like the High NA EUV's capability. I don't like the sticker price." Are you concerned that the price tag could affect demand for it? And I'm asking this as someone who has about 100% market share in this, so I understand that.
No, so, you know, I had the question many, many times in the last few months, and I always gave the simple answer. We never build a product in ASML with the idea that a new product would be more expensive than the previous one. Of course, the price is higher. But the price of all our product has been higher over time. And the reason for that is that the value they bring is even higher. So I think the reason why we make High NA is basically to enable customer to look at new design, so to create more flexibility, to look at the ability to go down another 2, 3, 4 nodes, which for this industry, at the end of the day, is the highest value we can ever generate. You know, a customer told me, you know, AI can happen today because we have this 3 nanometer node. We couldn't do AI with the previous node because this would have been too expensive, this would have been too much energy consumption. And in fact, for AI to really span out in all applications like we all dream of, there will be a need of another 2, 3 nodes to make sure that the cost goes down, to make sure that the energy consumption goes down. High NA is going to contribute to that. You know, what we dream of in ASML for the next 5, 10 years is going to contribute to that. And the value of High NA is to continue to enable Moore's Law to go with, of course, nowadays a bunch of other technology. But this is huge value. You know, I was also discussing with Caroline, who say, you know, AI is coming, it came, you know, like it's a big bang, right? And we know that as long as we continue to drive the industry, there will be another big bang at some point, which no one can even start to dream of. But this has been the story of this industry, and this is what High NA is going to contribute to, right? So Customer will adopt High NA when the value of it is right. And they will continue to use all the other lithography product, of course, at the same time.
My last question for you before I let you go. We saw during the pandemic what can happen when we lose control over the supply chain. Do you feel like it would be necessary for ASML to somehow use its cash pile to do more to gain control over the supply chain, have a little bit more power in decision making, whether that would be making acquisitions or increasing a stake in one of your suppliers such as Zeiss?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, by the way, because we said the market is going to be a bit less than we expected in 25. At the same time, we are continuing to build the capability we were missing in 2022. So that part, ASML has not stopped, because it takes time to do that. And we have, of course, had those discussions with our suppliers. Most of our suppliers are partners. Zeiss is a true partner. Right. They understand our industry as much as we do. We call the relationship with Zeiss 2 company, 1 business. I mean, the business is the same, and we still have a bit our different ways to do things. What I'm trying to say is that for most of our suppliers, we have a very strong alignment to make sure that we can meet the supply challenge of the industry. Only in very rare exception, we are acquiring some of the suppliers. The reason for that is usually if they cannot scale fast enough, if they cannot invest to the level we need them to invest. I think Cymer was a good example of that. When Cymer had to develop EUV, this was just too much too quickly. Therefore, we brought them in. We have another few examples, but that's the exception. We try to keep the supply chain separated because this allows us, if they deliver as we need, to be a lot more agile on our product and with our customers. So the model is very powerful, we believe.
Christophe, thanks for being with us today. Please join me in thanking ASML CEO Christophe Fouquet.